I learned what invisibility feels like on the day my husband was buried. My son stood at the podium with a voice that trembled just enough to look tender, and said he wanted to thank the woman who had been truly family during my husband's hardest years. Heads turned as if pulled by a string toward a graceful stranger in a fitted dress with tears arranged like jewelry. I sat 2 rows back in my charcoal coat, the real wife, the mother, suddenly an extra in my own life. A single thought set like ice behind my ribs. If this is the beginning, what on earth is the end? Robert died in a storm, they said. Brakes failed on a curved metal folded mercy fast. We had spent 40 years together, a marriage that was never a symphony, but I believed a sturdy house, weather-stained, stubborn, still standing. When he told me early on, "I can take care of you, you do not need to work," I let my career slip through my fingers like water, because devotion can look so much like purpose. I kept the calendars and the casseroles and the quiet, while he kept the outward shine that made neighbors nod and colleagues raise their glasses. Even his farewell demanded order, so I stood at the chapel door greeting guests, fingers numb, smile fixed, because he prized appearances and I still knew the steps. Our son, Daniel, 33, earnest and clean-lined in a dark suit, spoke with the steadiness he inherited from his father. My name hovered at the back of my throat, a blessing I thought might finally arrive. Instead, he called out another woman, Linda Mallister, the assistant, who became a consultant, who became a shadow stitched to Robert's side. A quick rustle moved through the room as she dabbed her eyes with a folded tissue and inclined her head with elegant modesty. The pause felt like the floor giving out. I held my teacup so hard, the rim dug crescents into my fingers. Later, I heard Daniel lean toward her and murmur that she was the one who had been family. The word cracked like thin ice under weight. Home after the service, the house sounded too neat. His chair at the table waited with the old authority of habit, and when I opened the refrigerator, his bitter beer glared from the shelf as if nothing had changed. I changed nothing. I walked room to room, touching the life I had ironed flat for decades. Somewhere under the clatter of plates and condolences, I began to suspect that grief was not the whole of it. Something else older and more deliberate was threaded through. The lawyer's office smelled of dust, and quiet sunlight slatted across the carpet. The man read in a slow monotone, a tone people use when they believe the words do not concern them. Pursuant to a will executed 3 years prior, the majority of Robert's assets, including the Summerall residence and a house in Nantucket, along with personal accounts, passed to Ms. Linda Mallister. The air snapped. Not a single dollar to me. I turned to Daniel for the quick human shock that would tether me to the moment, but his posture did not ripple. His hands were folded carefully the way one holds a position that will not be argued out of place. I knew before I asked that he had been prepared. When the reading ended, I stood because sitting felt like consent to a play that had cut my lines. He said his father had reasons. He said Linda understood him. He said with a gentleness that bruised worse than scorn that I had never really seen Robert the way Linda had. I understood then that I had not just lost a husband. I was losing the witness who might have remembered me as I had been the small boy with asthma and scraped knees, who had once clung to my neck in the surf and screamed for his mother. The distance in his face had been practiced for years. Afterward, I opened Robert's closet and breathed the quiet arrogance of cedar and wool. I searched drawers with the deliberate calm of someone counting to keep from falling. Receipts, letters, a folder from a property manager addressed to Linda 6 years ago for a house by the sea I had dusted and stocked as if it were ours. A photograph from a company gala where his smile, the one I had once guarded like a candle, burned toward her with easy light. The edges of the world went soft. I crossed the street to Giselle, our neighbor with roses and a memory like a ledger, and listened while she casually recalled Linda at symphonies and under our eaves helping with Christmas lights the year my knee swelled, and Robert said a neighborhood boy had lent a hand. 15 years, she thought. Long enough for roots. Back home, I set an old photo album on the table and watched myself reappear and vanish across decades, the sharp-haired woman at a conference table on Robert's right. Then the hostess with a menu. Then the shadow smoothing the napkin at his place. I lit a candle and put on a slow jazz record because the silence needed a shape. The clock ticked toward 10:00 p.m. and then toward 11:00 p.m., and I kept sitting until I could hear the question under all the noise. Who are you when the role you played is taken away? I did not yet know the answer, but I knew where to begin. You start by turning on the light. The light I turned on was not the lamp in the living room, but the one in my mind, the one that had been dimmed by years of compromise. The next morning, I carried that new brightness with me into the lawyer's office, where the air was stale with dust and the blinds sliced the sun into prison bars across the floor. As he recited the terms of Robert's will assets to Linda, not a dime to me, I felt my insides go still. My son sat straight-backed beside her hands, folded eyes fixed, betraying no surprise. That was when the realization crystallized he had known all along. When the session ended, I whispered to him, my voice trembling but sharp. You knew. He didn't deny it. His tone was calm, almost soothing, like a surgeon explaining a scar. Dad had his reasons. Linda was there for him. She understood him. You didn't. The words struck deeper than any inheritance. He was not defending his father's memory. He was redrawing the family map, erasing me from the center. I returned home that evening and opened Robert's closet. His shirts hung as if still waiting for his shoulders. Neat rows of wool vests, the faint smell of cedar. My hand trailed over them, but I felt nothing except the question. When did he decide I was no longer family? I rifled through drawers until my hands shook. In the kitchen, I found a folder of letters addressed to Linda, including one from a Nantucket property manager 6 years earlier. My stomach clenched. That house, the one where I had stocked shelves and straightened curtains, had never been mine. It had always been hers. I visited our neighbor Giselle, who had lived across the street for decades. She served tea in her sunlit parlor, roses blooming outside. When I mentioned Linda, her face stiffened. Oh, wasn't she the one Robert took to the symphonies? I always thought you didn't go because you didn't like them. My chest tightened. He had told me those nights were for work dinners, obligations I would find tedious. Giselle stirred her tea and added casually. She even helped him with the Christmas lights one year when you were upstairs with your knee swollen. I thought she was a cousin. I managed a brittle smile, but inside time collapsed. For 15 years or more, Linda had been a presence in my life, camouflaged as circumstance. Every sacrifice I had made, balancing budgets, dipping into my parents' savings to rescue his firm, was bricks he used to build a future for her. That night, I searched the basement and unearthed a cardboard box filled with photos. In one, Robert stood with his hand gently on Linda's arm, smiling with a lightness I had never seen directed at me. In another, Daniel, barely 18, stood beside them, his smile tentative but complicit. Scrawled in ink on the back were the words, "Our little family will be official one day." I dropped the photo, my breath caught in my throat. Trust broke not like glass, but like bone-deep aching, impossible to set back perfectly. That night, I lit a single candle in the kitchen and put on a jazz record, the soft hum of saxophone filling the house. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine that maybe my entire life had been lived to Robert's rhythm, never my own. But I wasn't ready to give up. Somewhere in me, a spark had survived the burial. The next day, I met Daniel at the town cafe, the same one where he had devoured caramel desserts as a boy. He arrived in a trench coat, his demeanor as stiff as the weather outside. Before I could even sit, he placed his phone face down, signaling impatience. "Why did you send Linda a legal notice?" he asked bluntly. His loyalty was naked now. I met his eyes and asked, "Do you think I shouldn't have?" He shrugged, his face tightening. "She didn't hurt you. Dad gave her the money. Suing her just makes everyone uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. My voice cracked with disbelief. "Your father deceived me for decades. I gave up my career, my friends, everything for this family. I even sold my mother's emerald ring to pay your tuition. Do you know what that meant to me?" He frowned, irritation flickering. "You always bring that up like I owe you something." The dull blow of those words landed harder than shouting ever could. He leaned back and added almost softly, "Dad told me the happiest years of his life were with Linda. She understood him. She respected him. You didn't." The cafe around me blurred. I looked at him, searching for the boy I once knew. The boy who gasped for breath through asthma attacks while I stayed awake all night. The boy who cried over bullies and heartbreak and found comfort in silence beside me. Did he remember any of that? I pulled an old photograph from my purse, one of him at the beach, at 2 years old, tiny footprints trailing behind him. "You screamed for me when the waves scared you," I said. "You knew where safety was." He glanced down, expression unreadable. "You idolize your father," I whispered. "But do you ever wonder who built the foundation for that elegant man who kept the lights on so he could shine?" He looked at me with that same practiced distance and said, "You were too strong. Dad didn't need that kind of love." I slid the photo back into my wallet and stood. My voice was calm, but steel edged every syllable. "You're right. I was too strong. And starting today, I'll keep that strength for myself." Rain tapped against the window as I walked out. I slid into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and sat in the rhythm of silence. I did not cry. I did not fall apart. I simply realized that I had lost more than a husband. I had lost my son. But in that emptiness, I finally knew what I must do. Stop waiting for someone else to define my worth. I went home that evening with a new kind of fire under my skin. At first, I thought Linda was only a late intrusion, a sudden opportunist who slipped through the cracks of Robert's life. But as I sat at the kitchen table staring at her public Facebook profile, I saw the truth unfold in curated smiles and captioned lies. Her photo albums were open to the world, Robert sitting in a wicker chair holding a slice of lemon pie she had made, the caption reading, "His smile is my favorite reward." The date was 6 years ago, the same year I was bedridden with arthritis, listening to Robert complain about his overwhelming workload and endless travel. He hadn't been escaping pressure. He had been escaping me. I clicked through more albums. There he was in her living room, wearing the wool jacket I had gifted him. There he was, helping her plant flowers, arranging bonsai in her garden. And then, a video Robert toasting her a Christmas song playing softly in the background. My breath caught when I saw Daniel in the frame hair, longer still college-aged. Linda's arm rested casually around his shoulders. She laughed. "Your dad should be proud of you." Daniel smiled shyly, not reluctantly, but as if he belonged there. I froze, my hand trembling above the touchpad. Linda had not only stolen my husband, she had positioned herself within my son's life as well, quietly rehearsing her role in the family I thought was mine. That night, I called Ruth, a former colleague and one of the few women I had trusted from my days as a financial consultant. She was semi-retired now, with a grandchild, and a sharp memory that never dulled. When she answered, her voice was warm. "Maggie, I've been meaning to call. I'm so sorry about Robert. I swallowed hard. Ruth, I need your help. I think Robert used company funds to buy Linda properties, maybe for years. I need to know. Her silence was heavy for a moment, then she said, "You're not just confronting a betrayal, Maggie. You're confronting fraud. If you want the truth, we'll find it." 2 days later, I sat in Ruth's cozy bungalow sipping lemon tea while she scrolled through old, archived payment records. "Look here," she said, tapping the screen. 3 entries labeled as outside consulting support. But the company is a shell, no physical office, no employees. And this one, she zoomed in $50,000 the same month you were recovering from surgery. My stomach twisted. Robert had siphoned money to Linda while I lay in bed, drugged and trusting. Ruth looked at me from behind her glasses. "Are you sure you want to push this? Many women would let it go." I shook my head. I've spent too long in the dark. I want the truth. On the way home, the autumn sun pressed hot against the windshield. The radio played an old ballad from the 60s, the chorus whispering, "You only find the truth when you stop pretending." I gripped the wheel tighter. No more pretending. Back at home, I saved Linda's photos into a folder I labeled Evidence. I was no longer the quiet wife behind the stove. I was Maggie Smith, the legal wife of Robert, the mother of Daniel, the woman erased from her own story, and now the one preparing to rewrite its ending. Soon after, Ruth sent me a second batch of documents, 3 suspicious transactions neatly annotated. The company name, Quinte Consulting, LLC. The recipient, Linda. The transfers, over $350,000 across 5 years, each carefully timed just beyond official audits. Ruth's note was blunt. "Without invoices for services, this is a fraudulent gift." Proof sat before me like a verdict. I called Michelle Robinson a fraud and corporate lawyer whose reputation Ruth vouched for. Her voice was brisk but kind, her tone steady as a handrail. "Send me everything," she said, "every receipt, every file." I printed the documents, sorted over 50 pieces of evidence into a folder, and carried it into her glass-walled office overlooking Chicago. She flipped through her sharp haircut, framing a face unreadable but focused. "We can work with this," she said. "It's going to be ugly, but you have a case." My heart pounded, but my voice did not waver. I want her to pay back every cent he gave her. I want her to feel the weight of what she stole, not just from me, but from the company, from the life I built alongside him. Michelle adjusted her glasses and nodded. "Then that's what we'll fight for." The weeks that followed were consumed by calls, filings, and nights of reviewing every shred of paper with Michelle's team. We filed a lawsuit against Linda, accusing her of fraudulent enrichment and the misappropriation of company funds. The news spread quickly. Robert's old firm grew nervous, his estate tangled in scrutiny, and the town whispered my name with new tones, not pity this time, but curiosity, even awe. But the hardest blow came from Daniel. He called me late one evening, his voice sharp with anger. "You're destroying Dad's memory," he said. I steadied myself, clutching the phone. "Daniel, your memory is a fairy tale. He was not the man you believe. He used money to betray me and even you." "That's the truth." He hung up without another word. I sat in silence, the dial tone buzzing like an empty room. The loss of his voice hurt more than any legal battle ever could. Still, I pressed forward. My nights were filled with documents, and my mornings with determination. For the first time in decades, I was living not for Robert, not for Daniel, but for myself. The court proceedings arrived like a storm I had been both dreading and waiting for my entire life. I remember the first day vividly, the smell of polished wood, the shuffle of papers, the tense murmur of lawyers preparing their opening remarks. Linda walked in wearing a sleek black suit, her hair styled to perfection, her expression composed in that practiced way of women who believe charm can bend truth. She barely glanced at me as though I were a nuisance taking up her air. My son Daniel sat beside her, his shoulders squared, his jaw set. He did not look at me either. It was as if I were already a ghost. Her lawyer painted a picture of innocence. He claimed the money Robert transferred to her had been legitimate consulting fees. He presented invoices, neatly typed dates, aligned perfectly with the payments Ruth had uncovered. But I knew a mask when I saw one, and those papers were masks. Our evidence told a different story. Shell companies with no offices transfers that fell outside audit cycles, photographs from Linda's own home, showing Robert in her kitchen, in her garden, in her arms. When it was my turn on the stand, I steadied myself. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind yet piercing eyes, asked me to recount my life with Robert. I told the truth, not just the betrayal, but the years before it. I described the sacrifices I had made, the career I gave up at his, urging the nights I balanced overdue accounts. The emerald ring from my mother I sold to pay Daniel's tuition. My voice wavered only once when I spoke of standing at his funeral and hearing my son call another woman family. The courtroom fell silent. Even Linda shifted in her chair, her polished veneer cracking for the briefest moment. Michelle, my lawyer, brought forward the evidence. She displayed the payment records one after another, with Ruth's annotations highlighted. She showed the photographs from Facebook, Robert wearing the jacket I had given him, Linda's arm, wrapped around Daniel like a second mother. Each detail was a thread, and together they wove a picture no charm could erase. Linda's defense began to unravel. The invoices she presented were proven fake, the signatures forged, the supposed consulting services non-existent. One by one, her lies collapsed under the weight of documented truth. I watched her composure falter, the way her lips pressed into thin lines, the flicker of panic that crossed her eyes when the judge asked pointedly, "If these payments were legitimate, where is the evidence of the work completed?" She had none. Days later, the verdict came. The judge ruled in my favor, her voice steady, final, undeniable. Linda was ordered to repay every cent, over $1 million in total, including interest. She was forced to sell the properties Robert had bought her to dismantle the little empire she thought she had built on the back of my sacrifices. Her reputation crumbled. She lost her job, her standing, even her place in the community. For someone who thrived on appearances, the fall was brutal. But victory did not come without cost. Daniel avoided me. He left the courtroom without a word, his loyalty still chained to the illusion of his father. Nights were heavy with the ache of his absence. I would sit at the dining table where his childhood laughter once rang, staring at the empty chair, wondering if he would ever forgive me for shattering the image of the man he adored. Winning against Linda did not erase the loneliness of losing my son. Time, however, has its own rhythm of healing. Months passed, then years. Life quieted. I tended to my own routines, planting flowers, cooking meals I wanted, instead of meals Robert preferred, reading books I had once put aside. Slowly, I reclaimed the corners of my life. It wasn't until my father's funeral years later that Daniel approached me again. His face was older, lined with responsibilities I hadn't witnessed, but his eyes softened when he saw me. He hugged me, tentative at first, then with a depth that made my chest ache. We began to speak again, carefully, slowly. Over time, he admitted that he had been blinded by his father's charisma, that defending Linda had been easier than facing the truth. He apologized for his silence, for the distance, for letting me stand alone when I needed him most. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden under the crabapple tree I had planted 20 years earlier, Daniel asked how I had found the strength to fight. I smiled faintly and told him that strength had always been there. I had just been giving it away to the wrong people. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Mom," he said, "when did you get so good at giving speeches?" I laughed softly. "I always was. You just weren't listening." For the first time in years, we laughed together, and the sound felt like spring. As the years passed, Linda vanished from my world entirely. What remained was not her triumph, but my survival. I learned that betrayal doesn't end you, it remakes you. I stood at the edge of my garden one evening, watching the crabapple tree bloom brighter than ever, and thought of how close I had come to cutting it down when it seemed barren. Life like that tree still had roots even when I thought it was finished. I knew who I was now. Not just Robert's wife or Daniel's mother. I was Maggie Smith, a survivor, a fighter, a woman who found her worth in the truth she uncovered and the strength she reclaimed. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent to keep the peace? Or would you have dared to face everything to win your voice back? I want to hear your thoughts. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Your stories may be the candle that lights someone else's way.